What if the most powerful man on Earth was also the most broken? The psychology of Homelander. Before we dive in, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. If you don't, Homelander will fly to your house and laser your Wi-Fi router. You've been warned. Introduction. The question. Nobody wants to answer. What happens when you take a child, helpless, innocent, desperate for love, and instead of giving him a family, you give him a laboratory? Instead of a mother's embrace, you give him steel walls, fluorescent lights, and scientists in white coats studying him like a specimen in a jar? What happens is Homelander. And here's the terrifying part. It makes complete psychological sense. Homelander, the central villain hero of Amazon Prime's The Boys, is not just a supervillain written to be hated. He is one of the most psychologically accurate portrayals of a specific, deeply tragic kind of broken human being ever put on screen. Every smile that goes a half-second too long, every need for applause, every explosion of rage when someone dares to reject him, it's all rooted in real psychology that experts recognize, study, and, in less extreme forms, treat every single day. This is not just a character analysis. This is a window into what abuse, isolation, and the weaponization of a child's need for love can actually produce. And if you pay close attention, some of what you'll read here might feel uncomfortably familiar. Not because you're a super-powered narcissist, probably, but because the emotional wounds Homelander carries are wounds that humans, in varying degrees, carry too. Let's go deep. And I mean deep. Part 1. The Foundation. What Vought actually did to him. To understand Homelander's psychology, you need to start not with the adult in the cape, but with the infant in the tube. Homelander, real name John, later revealed, was injected with Compound 5 as a baby and immediately became the property of Vought International. He was raised not in a home, but in a controlled environment designed to maximize his usefulness as an asset. No parents, no siblings, no neighborhood kids, no birthday parties, no one to hold him when he cried except researchers who were documenting his vital signs while he did. This is not dramatic license for the sake of a dark TV show. This is a clinical description of radical early attachment deprivation. And developmental psychologists have studied what it does to human beings for decades. The most foundational work here comes from John Bowlby's attachment theory. Bowlby established that human infants are biologically wired to form a deep, primary bond with a caregiver, and that this bond is not optional. It is as necessary to psychological development as food is to physical development. When that bond is absent, disrupted, or poisoned, the consequences ripple through every dimension of the person's development. Their ability to regulate emotions, their capacity for empathy, their sense of self-worth, their relationship to power and control. Children raised without secure attachment don't just feel sad. They develop fundamentally different internal working models of the world. They learn at a neurological level that the world is not safe, that people cannot be trusted, that love is not freely given but must be performed for, earned, or taken by force. Homelander didn't just miss out on warmth, he was actively conditioned. Every sign of vulnerability was, implicitly or explicitly, punished or ignored. Every display of power was rewarded. The message baked into his nervous system from infancy. Weakness invites abandonment. Power commands attention. That message is the psychological core of everything Homelander is. Part 2. Narcissistic Personality Disorder. But not the way people think. When most people hear narcissist, they picture someone who's vain, self-centered, and a bit insufferable at dinner parties. Homelander is something far more specific and far more tragic. A textbook case of malignant narcissistic personality disorder layered over what clinicians would likely classify as borderline personality organization. Let's break this down. NPD at its clinical core is not about arrogance. It is about a profound structural emptiness at the center of the self. People with NPD have what psychoanalysts call a fragile self. Their sense of identity and self-worth is not internally generated. It depends entirely on external validation. Admiration, applause, fear, worship. These are not luxuries for someone with NPD. They are oxygen. Watch Homelander at a rally. Watch how he physically transforms when the crowd chants his name. His body relaxes. His eyes soften. For a moment, just a moment, he looks almost at peace. That's not ego. That's a man whose psychological survival depends on that noise. The silence between the cheers is, for him, a kind of death. This is called narcissistic supply, and Homelander requires it in industrial quantities. But here's the uniquely devastating twist in Homelander's psychology. He doesn't actually believe he deserves it. This is the part that most surface-level readings miss. Homelander is not secretly confident. He is not, somewhere underneath the performance, comfortable with himself. Beneath the grandiosity is what psychologists call the hidden shame core, a deep, unspoken conviction that he is fundamentally defective, unlovable, and worthless. The grandiosity is not an expression of self-love. It is a fortress built to keep the shame from destroying him. Every time someone fails to give him the adulation he needs, that fortress cracks, and what pours out through the cracks is rage. Part 3. The rage, why Homelander doesn't just get angry, he becomes catastrophic. One of the most chilling things about Homelander is how suddenly he shifts from charm to violence. He can be smiling, warm, presidential, and then, in the span of 3 seconds, he is incinerating someone with his laser eyes while his expression barely changes. This is not just dramatic storytelling. This is narcissistic injury response, and it follows a precise psychological logic. When someone with NPD experiences what psychologists call a narcissistic injury, a rejection, a humiliation, a failure to be recognized, it does not register in the same way it might for a neurotypical person. For most people, being criticized is unpleasant. For someone whose entire psychological architecture depends on external validation, criticism is not unpleasant. It is existentially threatening. It triggers the same survival response as physical danger. The amygdala fires, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, empathy, impulse control, goes offline. What remains is pure, primal, defensive aggression. In a person without superpowers, this might manifest as a screaming match, a door slammed, a cutting remark. In Homelander, it manifests as mass murder. But notice something crucial. Homelander almost never experiences genuine remorse after these episodes. He may perform remorse, and he is an extraordinary performer. But the internal experience is absent. This is because, in his psychological framework, the person he destroyed was threatening his survival. You don't feel guilty for defending yourself. This is also why Homelander is so dangerous when he's being nice. His niceness is always instrumental. It is a tool for securing the supply he needs. The moment it stops working, the moment someone doesn't respond the way he needs them to, the mask does not just slip. It disintegrates. Part 4. The Mother Wound. Stormfront, Madeline Stillwell, and the search for a God who loves him. One of the most psychologically rich threads in The Boys is Homelander's relationship with mother figures. Madeline Stillwell, his handler at Vought, is the most explicit example. Homelander's relationship with her is simultaneously sexual, infantile, and desperate in a way that would be almost comedic if it weren't so disturbing. He literally drinks her breast milk. He calls her Mommy. He needs her to tell him he's special. This is not random grotesque character detail. This is a precise psychological portrait of what's called developmental fixation, a psychological arrest at an early stage of development caused by unmet needs during that stage. Homelander's need for a mother was never met, not even close. So that need never went away. It sits inside him, enormous and infantile and completely unresolved, and it reaches out toward any woman who offers him a combination of power and nurturing. He doesn't relate to these women as an adult. He relates to them as the baby in the laboratory who needed someone, anyone, to tell him he was worth loving. When Homelander kills Madeline Stillwell, it is one of the most psychologically loaded moments in the entire series. He has just discovered she was deceiving him, and the discovery doesn't just make him angry, it shattered him, because she wasn't just a colleague who betrayed him. She was, in his internal world, the mother who abandoned him. Again, every abandonment reactivates the original wound. Every betrayal confirms the deepest fear. I am unlovable. Everyone will leave, and power is the only thing I actually have. Part 5. The Mirror Problem. Why Ryan matters more than anything. If you want to understand what Homelander is actually searching for, look at how he relates to his son, Ryan. Ryan represents something Homelander has never had: a mirror, a biological extension of himself, someone who, by definition, cannot be completely other, cannot be a stranger, cannot be entirely alien to him. In Ryan, Homelander sees the possibility of something he has never experienced: being loved not for his power, not for his performance, but for what he is. Except, of course, he has no idea how to do that. He has never been loved that way himself. He has no model for it. He tries to teach Ryan to be powerful because power is the only love language he knows. He tries to make Ryan fear the world because fear justified his own need for control. He tries to make Ryan need him because the terror of being unnecessary, of being abandoned, is the deepest terror he carries. The tragedy of Homelander's relationship with Ryan is that his love is real. It is perhaps the only authentically real thing in him. And it is completely incompatible with healthy parenting, because a man who was never parented cannot parent. He can only recreate the dynamics of his own formation: power, need, performance, fear, and call it love, because he has no other word for it. This is one of the most important psychological insights the show offers. Abusive relational patterns are not primarily the product of malice. They are the product of people trying to give love with tools that are fundamentally broken. Homelander is not trying to damage Ryan. He is trying, in the only way he knows how, to give Ryan what he himself never had. And the gap between the intention and the execution is devastating. Part 6. The Performance of Humanity. What the smile actually means. There's a specific Homelander smile that fans have cataloged extensively: the smile that is slightly too wide, lasts slightly too long, and doesn't quite reach his eyes. It appears when he's being photographed, when he's winning an argument, when he's about to do something terrible. Psychologists would call this a social mask, or, in the context of NPD, the false self, a constructed persona designed to secure admiration and conceal the emptiness underneath. Homelander's false self is extraordinarily elaborate. He has studied humanity. He knows what faces to make, what words to say, what gestures communicate warmth and relatability. He performs humanity with the precision of an actor who has spent decades studying the role. But there's always a tell. Because the false self, no matter how sophisticated, is exhausting to maintain. It requires constant monitoring, constant calculation of how the performance is landing, constant adjustment. And in moments of stress, or when the reward, the admiration, the fear, doesn't arrive on schedule, the performance stutters. Those stutters are the most revealing moments in Anthony Starr's extraordinary portrayal of the character. The flicker when someone doesn't react the way he expected. The momentary blankness when he's processing a social cue he doesn't instinctively understand. The overcorrection when he realizes he's being perceived negatively and needs to course correct. These are not acting choices. They are psychological accuracy. Homelander doesn't have a rich inner emotional life that he's hiding behind a mask. He has a mask, and behind it is a vast, howling absence where an inner life was supposed to be, and has never fully formed. Part 7. Power Without Accountability. The Ultimate Psychological Experiment. Let's ask a genuinely disturbing question. What does giving unlimited power to this specific kind of psychology actually produce? Because Homelander is, in a sense, a thought experiment. Most people with NPD and severe attachment disorders are constrained by physical limitations, by social consequences, by the law, by other people's power to leave or resist. The disorder produces suffering, but it is ultimately checked by reality. Remove those checks. Give a man with Homelander's psychology the ability to fly, to project heat from his eyes, capable of cutting through steel, to hear everything around him, to survive anything. And you have removed the primary mechanism by which reality limits and shapes behavior. For most people, consequences teach. They are the feedback loop that shapes behavior toward social viability. For Homelander, consequences don't exist in the normal sense. He cannot be physically hurt. He cannot be imprisoned. He cannot be meaningfully punished. What this means psychologically is that every distorted belief he holds, I deserve worship. People exist to serve me. Love must be taken, not given. Weakness is unforgivable, goes completely unchallenged by reality. There is no corrective. There is no therapist powerful enough, no consequence severe enough, no relationship stable enough to do the kind of deep therapeutic work that his psychology actually requires. This is why Homelander is not just a villain. He is a cautionary tale about power itself, about what happens when systems fail to build in accountability, when one entity is allowed to become so powerful that normal social and institutional correctives no longer function. The parallels to real-world structures of power, corporate, political, military, are not subtle, and they are entirely intentional. Part 8. Is there a path to redemption? What psychology actually says. Here's a question that divides fans and that psychology can address with some honesty. Can Homelander be saved? The answer is complicated, and it's important to be honest about why. Personality disorders, particularly NPD and the underlying developmental trauma that drives them, are among the most difficult psychological conditions to treat. Not because people with these conditions are inherently hopeless, but because the treatment requires something that the disorder itself prevents: genuine willingness to be vulnerable, to acknowledge need, to sit with the shame rather than defend against it. For someone like Homelander, who has built his entire psychic architecture around never being vulnerable, never needing, never being small, that requirement is almost impossible to meet. Therapy works when the client can acknowledge that something is wrong with them. Homelander's psychology does not allow that acknowledgement. Every problem in his internal framework is caused by other people's failures, not his own. There are, however, moments, rare and fragile, where something underneath the armor shows. His interactions with Ryan, the moments when he's truly alone and the performance briefly drops. A flicker of something that might, in different circumstances, have been the beginning of genuine connection. Those moments suggest that the person underneath the disorder is not entirely unreachable. They suggest that the infant who was put in a laboratory and denied love is still somewhere inside the adult, present, still wanting what he never got, still capable of something that resembles authentic longing. But wanting to be loved is not the same as being capable of receiving it. And Homelander, at this stage of his development, may simply be too armored, too defended, too catastrophically shaped by his early experience to find his way to the vulnerability that healing would require. That is not a moral judgment. It is a developmental tragedy. Conclusion: why Homelander matters beyond the show. We watch Homelander and we feel a cocktail of emotions: fear, disgust, pity, dark fascination, and, if we're being fully honest, occasional uncomfortable sympathy. That sympathy is not a bug. It's a feature. It's the show doing something genuinely important. Because Homelander is not a monster from outside human experience. He is a product of human decisions. The decision to treat a child as an asset, to prioritize utility over humanity, to withhold love as a tool of control. He is what happens at the extreme end of processes that, in milder forms, play out in families, institutions, and systems around the world every day. The psychology of Homelander is a mirror. Not because we are like him. Most of us are not, and cannot be, anywhere near his level of damage or danger, but because the wounds underneath him, the need for love, the terror of abandonment, the rage that comes from shame, the performance of a self we're not sure is real, those are recognizably uncomfortably human. Understanding Homelander doesn't excuse him. It illuminates him. And in illuminating him, it illuminates something about what human beings need and what happens, on every scale from the personal to the civilizational, when those needs go catastrophically unmet. He is, in the end, the most powerful man in the world, and he would trade every bit of that power for one thing he never had and cannot name: someone to hold him without wanting something in return. Subscribe to the channel. New deep dives like this every week. We go places most channels are afraid to go. Leave a like. It literally takes 1 second, and it helps more than you know. Also, Homelander is watching your click activity. Just saying. Drop a comment below. Who do you think is more psychologically complex? Homelander or Billy Butcher? Let's debate.